Thank you. You can go ahead and introduce.
Okay, I have to remember who I am and say it. So my name is Howard Nussbaum. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Chicago and faculty director of the Chicago Center for Practical Wisdom. And my next note says we will have a few minutes for Q&A at the end of the talk, and we'll be keeping an eye on the online chat. If anyone has questions or comments, feel free to post them there. Our guest speaker today is Professor Shigehiro Oishi, who is the Marshall Field IV Professor of Psychology at the University of Chicago. Shige has over 200 plus publications, including books such as Life in Three Dimensions, How Curiosity, Exploration, and Experience Make a Fuller, Better Life. Hope we're adding to your sales here. And the Psychological Wealth of Nations, Do Happy People Make a Happy Society? Professor Oishi's lab here at the University of Chicago focuses on the study of culture, social ecology, and well-being, and is guided by big questions such as what is a good life and what is a good society. His talk today is titled The Science of Well-Being, and he will discuss two main programs of research centered on happiness and meaning in life, where he will review major advancements in each program and present a third line of research that centers on psychological richness in terms of life experiences. Please welcome Professor Shigehiro Oishi.
Thank you so much, Howard, for lovely introductions. So today I will talk about the science of well-being, and maybe about 15-20 minutes, essentially sort of the history of scientific approach to this study of well-being. And then the last 15-20 minutes, I'll give you pretty recent empirical series of studies, four studies about this subtitle, What Doesn't Kill You Make You Really Stronger? Question mark. All right, so let's start with the brief history, but when I say science of well-being, I'm just trying to contrast that with the study of well-being, because study of well-being is very, very old. 2,500 years ago already, many ancient Greek philosophers thought about this. And of course, you can look at the Aristotle, this is one of my favorite book, and I think one of the first self-help book, you might say. I mean, you learn quite a bit about how to live life, how to do it. Book one is very interesting because the title of the book one is the object of life. So he asks question of what is the ultimate goal of life? And this is still January, so many of you might remember your New Year resolutions, do you? So people have a lot of goals, like New Year's resolution. Finally, this year I'm going to exercise more, eat healthy, or being kind, or being more productive, or something like that. So Aristotle starts with this kinds of goal-directed activities, which makes uniquely human, right? What is human? Well, we are interested in a lot of things, do a lot of things, but for some purpose. So then he asks, why do you want to lose weight? Is that the ultimate goal? The answer is that the ultimate goal? No, right? You want to lose weight so that you'll be healthier, or you look better, physically attractive. Then you can ask the next question, is being healthy or being physically attractive ultimate goal? It's not, hopefully, because you want to be healthy so that you can do all the things you love to do, or you want to be physically attractive perhaps so that people treat you nicely or with respect, I don't know, whatever. But so he goes through main concerns of human beings. Back in the ancient Greek, honor was a big thing, right? So a lot of people say, I want honor. But then why? Well, the same thing, right? Status, power, money. Essentially, he goes through entire main goals that humans pursue, and these are all instrumental goals. And ultimately, there is only one thing that is intrinsic and self-sufficient. That is the happiness. Therefore, the happiness is the ultimate goal or the object of life. And he furthermore says that the happiness is living well or doing well. Of course, if you read further, they get way more complicated. You have to lead a virtuous life, you have to engage in contemplative life, and so forth. But that was the beginning, and we knew a lot about well-being or how to live a good life, just that it wasn't scientific in a Karl Popper way, that it's not the falsifiable. So then when did the science of well-being happen? Of course, psychology is a newcomers in this regard, right? William James, The Principle of Psychology, was published in 1890. He just started offering first intro to psychology in the US. Of course, in Germany, Wilhelm Wundt had already huge psychophysiology labs since 1870s, but then they weren't really looking at the happiness or anything like that, the 2 points differential perceptions and those kinds of things. So finally then, when did psychologists start investigating this rather vague idea of happiness or being well and so forth? Actually, there are lots of attempts in 1920s and 1930s. So one of my favorite papers is 1934 paper published in Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology. Today, that's the precursor of Journal of Personality and Social Psychology and Journal of Abnormal Psychology. But in this 1934 paper, George Hartman studied, the title is Personality Traits Associated with Variation in Happiness. Introduction is really interesting. So I read, in a recent autobiographical sketch by a past president of the American Psychological Association, the following passage appears. I'm desirous of participating in the solution of one more problem in applied psychology, that is a problem of protracted human happiness. Whether or not it fits in with one's philosophy of life, the fact is incontestable that happiness is an important, if not the most important aim of human endeavor. Notwithstanding this fact, it has received no commensurate scientific attention. The theory of the happy life remains at about the level where Greek philosophers left it. So he wanted to move beyond the Greek philosophy. And actually, he did a great job. He did the test, retest of the happiness. He did the self-reports and informant reports of the happiness and show correlation of 0.34. Test retest was 0.71. So very, very good start. But anyone who knows the history of psychology knows that this didn't continue, right? We had, unfortunately, the dark age. And the dark age of the happiness research, I have to blame B.F. Skinner. Although I love B.F. Skinner as a novelist. How many of you have read The Walden 2? It's fantastic utopian novel. It's fantastic. I mean, I was never imagined I would be moved by B.F. Skinner's novel, right? He described this bizarre world of Walden 2, socially engineered, based fully on behaviorism, essentially. But this was, in essence, the critique of fuzzy concept. So in the end, his main character says, what is love? And actually, he is feeling love toward these children who lives in the world too. And then he quickly said, oh, except another name for the use of positive reinforcement. It's just like crack me up. So anyway, the happiness is also in the behaviorism, just a result of positive reinforcement, right? That anything we have to reduce to observable behavior. And that was the ethos of the mainstream experimental psychology, so you couldn't possibly really study happiness and get tenure. And that's what my advisor, Ed Dina, also said. He waited until he got tenure to start studying happiness. But anyway, despite this environment, still people did study of happiness. Applied psychologists, sociologists, Gallup survey always had the questions about happiness. So indeed, 1967, there is a psych bulletin that summarized some of the literature, and Warner Wilson. So I want to say that there was a sporadic effort to study things like happiness. But in general, things like love, emotion, happiness were considered as untouchable. You cannot study scientifically. In 1984, Ed Dina essentially upgraded the Wilson's 1967 paper, even with the wider, more interdisciplinary review. And key part here is that he put the subjective to describe well-being. Philosophers tend to view well-being as objective and very normative and prescriptive, that this is how you should be living. So in the case of Aristotle, of course, it's a virtuous life and life of contemplation. Namely, if you're a philosopher, you're leading a good life, but if you're not a philosopher, you are not. Ed essentially wanted to bring down from the top-down theory of well-being to the bottom-up theory of well-being. So why don't we ask people how they feel, whether they feel like they're leading a good life, and maybe we can compare those people who think they're leading a good life and those people who are struggling and try to identify the factors that actually differentiate. And these are the essentially scientific approach to happiness. Instead of building the theory out of this logics and so forth, just gather information and then just start building it. So that was the approach. And this approach was quite successful. I mean, of course, there are many people who continue to doubt whether it's possible to measure happiness. But I think there is enough evidence that the self-reported happiness is not out of nowhere. If Howard says he is happy, usually Anne will agree. Usually, right? So that correlation, if that doesn't exist, then maybe self-report is completely useless. But meta-analysis often shows something like 0.40 correlation between self-report and informal report. So that is good. So in 1984 on, Ed Dinas and others started asking more interesting questions. What's sort of the reality check? So what would people, who do you think are happy, right? Rich people happier? Good-looking people happier? Young people happier? Lottery winner happier? Healthy people happier? So rich people question is really interesting. He actually surveyed Forbes' richest 400 Americans, list from 1983, and shockingly, 49 people answered this question here. And then he just find the location matched control conditions. And yes, these not just rich, but these are extreme, super rich, right? Are they really happy? Yeah, they're happier than ordinary people. But actually, if you look at the satisfaction with life scale mean score, 1 to 7-point scale, mean was only 4.77. Undergraduate here, University of Chicago, the average is 4.75 in my data. So it's virtually no difference. So we think the rich people are really happy, poor people really poor. Difference exists, but we tend to overestimate perhaps. Lottery winner, yeah, they are a little bit happier than the disabled people in this 1978 paper, but we again overestimate how happy they are. Physically attractive people, what do you think? Are they happier? I mean, of course, most of us want to look better than worse. A lot of people do cosmetic surgery even. Ed had University of Illinois undergraduate come in, take a picture, have 10 other students rate physical attractiveness of each participant. You know self-report. We know sort of the objective rating of physical attractiveness. What was the correlation? 0. 0. But what about subjective evaluation of physical attractiveness? So namely, I don't know, I'm too old, but do you guys know Seinfeld?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a Seinfeld. So Kramer, right? Objectively speaking, is he beautiful? I don't know, but he really thinks he is beautiful, right? So they are happy. Subjective rating of physical attractiveness do correlate with the subjective self-reports of happiness, but objective, no. So there are lots of interesting findings like that, but big one later on, I think, is that these findings sort of shed light that maybe when we try to think about the things that make us happy, these are the big things, right? If you're in academia, oh, if you get a tenure-track job, I'll be happy. Once you get a job, then, oh, if I get the tenure, I'll be happy. And then once you get tenure, if I become full professor, I'll be happy. But then when you look at the people who did get tenure and who didn't get tenure, our prediction and the reality diverge. So in the 1990s, there are a series of studies about affective forecasting errors by Dan Gilbert, Tim Wilsons, and so forth, showing again and again we tend to overestimate these rare events. You can look at other things as well, like marriage, right? How many young people spend their time just looking for a mate, right? So we care. But the longitudinal study shows that, well, 6 months before real marriage, you're really happy. You get married, you're still happy, but 2 years later, you're down to 2 years before marriage, essentially just being married. You're really excited, just married, become just married. There's a cartoon I forgot to bring. But anyway, so these series of things essentially shows that what makes people happy are not these rare big events, but in the end, it was everyday conversations, cup of coffee, morning walk. So Ed has chapter entitled "Happiness is not intensity, but the frequency of positive emotion." If you want to increase happiness, you shouldn't try to increase this rare, intense positive emotion, but rather try to make sure you have this small dose of joy very, very frequently. So that's one. Another thing was that, so these external factors like status, money, look, those things do not seem to contribute or account for individual differences in self-reported happiness. Then what does? Well, personality has a lot to do with it. So personality traits such as extroversion, neuroticism. Of course, if you're neurotic, you're not going to be happy. I mean, you can be making $300,000. If you're neurotic, you're not going to be as happy as somebody who's making $100,000 non-neurotic, right? It's just a matter of really seeing the glass half full or half empty. If your mindset is always just, oh, it's empty, half empty, then you're just focusing on the negative aspects of life. And that is hard. So internal, essentially how we view the world, like personality, like mindset, really makes a difference. One of the famous studies about the maximizing versus satisficing. Maximizer is that type of people who want to get the best possible outcome. So if you're applying for college, you're applying to 20 colleges. Satisficer is essentially those people who say, this is good enough for me. So somebody who said, oh, University of Virginia would be an in-state tuition, early decision, I'm just going to go for it. Whereas the maximizer would say, I'm sure I can get into UVA, but maybe I can get into Cornell or wherever. So just apply to a bunch of places. So Barry Schwartz and Sheena Iyengar followed the graduating senior who are looking for job. They measure maximizing tendency, satisfying tendency in the fall. They look through how many jobs they applied, how many interviews they got, what kind of job they essentially took. Who got the better job, maximizer or satisfier? Maximizer get more interview. They tend to get better paying job. Okay, so objectively speaking, if you're just looking at the number of offers, number of interview, the entry level salaries, then the maximizer won. Right? Economists are essentially right. But 6 months later, they went back and asked, how satisfied are you with your job? It was the satisfier who was making less money, but they can say, I am happy with what I have. Whereas maximizer is always trying to look at better options out there, so never get satisfied. So the mindset is important, and I think here we can go back to William James' formula. Essentially, when he talked about self-esteem, so here we can replace it with the happiness. He talked about self-esteem or happiness as essentially determined by two things. One is amount of success you have, right? The more success you have, you feel great about your life. But importantly, there is a denominator, which is the ambition. And the problem with promotions and so forth is that once you achieve your goal, you become associate professor, you got tenure, your success increased, but then your ambition also increased to now I want to be a full professor. So the ratio is not going up. Therefore, in general, American culture is really focusing on success. How can I increase my output? But if you look at cross-culturally, which countries are the happiest? Finland, Denmark. Why? They are not more successful than Americans. They are successful in terms of managing their ambitions. They don't expect that much. They are appreciative for what they have. That's why the tendency, a mindset of gratitude, for instance, you are grateful for what you have and the friends and family you have. That is fairly conducive to well-being because that will help you manage your ambitions and appreciation of that. So I always say if you want to be happier, not just trying to achieve more goals, but also just try to make sure you manage your ambitions and desires. And even when you don't have greater success, if you can manage your desire to shrink a little bit, actually in terms of the ratio, you're increasing happiness. Okay, so that's the basic finding from the happiness research. Very surprisingly, the people with the modest ambitions are happier than the big ambitions. And we tend to overestimate big events. In reality, it's a small, frequent, repeatable activity that makes us happy. Okay, so I like happiness research, but there are lots of critique of happiness research. 5 years after original Ed Dina paper was published, this paper by Carol Riff was published in JPSP, 1989. Title says it all. Happiness is everything, or is it? So she criticized essentially happiness approach to be too selfish. If Hitler was happy, then was he leading a good life? The answer is no, of course. So she wanted to bring a little more societal contribution to the empirical picture rather than whether the person is feeling happy about what they have or what they are doing. Okay. So, for instance, my graduate students, Mike Stiga, came to University of Minnesota when I was a brand new assistant professor, and he wanted to study meaning in life. And I'm like, don't do it. Because it's just not possible to really measure meaning in life, because happiness is already difficult enough. But he was very persistent, so he did his dissertation on meaning in life questionnaire. Incredible. Now it's just 7,000 times cited. He's like, he did TED Talks, and he's a Mr. Meaning in Life. So it is measurable, he proved, and he can do this. I said it will take 15 years, but he did it in 6 years, so it's amazing. So what did we find? So meaning, although again, meaning is very, very vague. Some people find their life to be meaningful, some people don't. What are the difference? Well, 3 things are different. One is that those people who can say my life is meaningful tend to say that my life matters. My life has some kind of significance. If I weren't here, the world is not the same place. So they see tangible societal contribution. So significance. The second part is that, many of us at some point in our life just feel stuck or aimless, right? What am I doing with my life, right? On the other hand, some people have really clear sense of vision and direction. And it turns out the people who find the meaning in life tend to be driven by a sense of purpose, very strong mission. So sense of direction, guidance, that is important. The third thing is the coherence. Essentially, we have so many different roles we play in our family, professionally, neighborhood, whatever. And sometimes we feel torn apart because what kids demand of you and professionally demanded conflict with each other. Those people who can say their life is meaningful is a type of people who feel like these pieces are fit together neatly. They feel like life is coherent. And of course, in that sense, religion helps. If you have some very strong religious belief, that could essentially tell you you feel like you have the place in the universe. If you are not so religious, of course, you can find that kind of guiding principle in some values, ideology, and so forth. But the important point here is that essentially finding meaning in life is like looking at the abstract paintings, right? Jackson Pollock, the splash, splash, splash. So what does that mean? It's very difficult to find the meaning. And the people who find meaning is find the pattern, find the sense of directions and cohesion. So it is really just the active pattern recognition and things of that nature. Otherwise, the world doesn't make sense. And unless world is comprehensible, you cannot find the meaning in life. Tolstoy, as you know, very successful, most famous novelist in the history, right? He already had War and Peace published, widely acclaimed. But at age 50, he had huge existential crisis. And he says he had the wife who loved me and whom I loved, and children who adore me and I adore. His property was growing without much effort. And the folks are giving him so much respect, the level of respect he has never received before. Yet he could not give any reasonable meaning to any actions of his life. So that's why the meaning in life is super subjective, and you just have to find it yourself. But how do you do it? Well, it's like connecting the dot, right? In particular, in your case, the historic connection is important. Those people who can find meaning in life tend to say their past life connect closely with present life, and I can see how that connect to the future. Somewhat surprising findings. Nostalgic people report higher level of meaning in life. Why nostalgia, right? But the reason, at least, is that the nostalgic people tend to maintain old relationship, old friends. And to the extent that you have old friends, you can see yourself, old you, and then see the continuations. And that really helped them feel like their life is coherent. And they see from the past, present to the future. Another thing, those people who find the meaning is those who are in this profession, teaching profession. You might have seen The Death of Socrates painting by Jackie David. He is 70 years old. He is, given the essentially death sentence. His followers are devastated, but he is fine. And Crito even tried to find the escape to the foreign country. But the Socrates refused to go because he has no fear of death. And first of all, he says, of course I have no fear of death because the philosophy is to learn not to fear death. The whole point of philosophy is how not to fear death, right? So he's no fear. But of course he had this weird theory of soul, that his soul will continue to the next life. So he was convinced that his soul will continue, so he had no fear. But in addition, he had a legacy. He knew that his disciples will continue his essentially Socratic dialogues to the future. So if you can find, right, somebody who is next generation, who share your vision, then you can easily see that your legacy will continue. If you are not in a teaching profession, so you don't like mentoring, then the final advice I can give you is just plant a tree. Actually, George Orwell said this: planting tree is the way you can leave the legacy, way beyond your posterity. And if successfully rooted, then the tree will outlive any of your action, good or bad. So essentially you can do plant a tree, literally or metaphorically, and that's how you find a meaning in life, as difficult it is. Okay, so those are the two programs of research. Now let's move on to the new one. So what's wrong with happiness and meaning? They seem quite wonderful, right? It's indeed quite wonderful. But if you think about the happiness again, right, those people who are happy tend to say, this is good enough for me. What makes people happy is just hang out with your best friend and family member. That means you're really staying in the comfort zone. What happened to your adventure, learning something new, right? You can be very self-contained and live in a small, cozy world and be perfectly content. Meaning in life, what gives you meaning in life? Pew survey shows half of the Americans say family, another 30% say career. Sure, you can find the meaning in those places, but again, you're living in a pretty small world. Probably most of you have watched the movie It's a Wonderful Life, right? The main character, George Bailey, lives in a small town. He has this ambition of traveling all over the world, building the 100-story buildings and so forth. But his father gets sick and dies, and he had to take over his father's business. So he stayed. And then once his younger brother finished his college, he was going to leave that company to his younger brother and he will go away. But unfortunately, he found some rich girl from Buffalo whose father wanted him to take over, so he had to take over. So therefore, reluctantly, George remained in this small town and help out his poor people, give them the mortgage and so forth. In the end, he's rewarded, right? All the people in the town come and help him, and his societal contribution was rewarded. It's a wonderful life. But at the end of his life, will he have no regret? I doubt it, right? So that's the potential trade-off of life of meaning, life of happiness. You could be containing yourself in a small world and maybe sacrificing big ambitions, big exploration, adventure. So some people like to live life of adventure, life of exploration, life of curiosity. And unfortunately, the current measure of happiness and meaning do not seem to capture that part. Indeed, when you look at the meta-analysis of Big Five personality traits, then extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness all correlated with the happiness and meaning. But the openness to experiences, 0.08 correlation with happiness, 0.2 with the meaning. So that's where psychological richness comes into play. So we wanted to capture this missing piece, the openness, the exploration, adventure. So essentially, we wrote this psych review paper in 2022, Psychological Rich Life Beyond Happiness and Meaning. So psychological rich life we define as a life filled with diverse, interesting experiences that result in change in perspective. So we find, for instance, that those people who study abroad, so we longitudinally follow and compare them with the undergraduate students who want to go to study abroad later, but that quarter they are on campus. Time one, absolutely. Week one of the quarter, there is absolutely no difference in richness, happiness, meaning, or Big Five personality or socioeconomic status between these two groups. After 13 weeks, the study abroad group, psychological richness goes up, 1 standard deviation than that. On-campus group, 0 change, absolutely 0 change. So you see dramatic increase in psychological richness, meaning actually increased 0.3, but not significantly different from actually the on-campus group. Happiness, no difference. So we have a series of studies to show that the psychological richness capture different aspects of the well-being from the happiness and the meaning. All right, so this is just a summary. The happy life is comfortable, joy, and secure, and at the deathbed, you might say, I had fun. Meaningful life, significance, purpose, and coherence. And at the deathbed, you might say, I made a difference. Psychological rich life is characterized by variety, interest, and perspective change. And at the end of life, somebody might say, I've seen and learned a lot. And to me, wisdom, at the end of life, if you want to have wisdom, you just sort of have to have the psychological rich mindset. Otherwise, you don't have enough experiences or enough perspectives that in order for us to be flexible and being able to take somebody's perspective and give good advice, breadth and the depth of the knowledge, you really do need experiences or the tremendous amount of reading or watching documentaries and so forth. All right, so the remainder of the time, very quickly, I'm just going to tell you the recent project of What Doesn't Kill You Make Really Stronger with Yonja Cha, Jen Smith, Nicole Lepama, and Min Young Koo. So we did 4 studies, very quickly. Go through this, but inspiration is my favorite philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. For a typically healthy person, conversely, being sick can even become an energetic stimulus for life, for living more. He exploits bad accidents to his advantage. What doesn't kill him makes him stronger. So, so he's a big proponent of experience and challenge and go out of your comfort zone. So we did this first study just because I was approached by the psychologist working in the retirement home, and she wanted me to be a consultant, and I had never done consulting work, so like, why? And she said, oh, she's collecting essentially information from the residents, and she wanted to measure well-being. So I said, yes, if you include psych richness. So she said yes. So we collected data from 284 residents of the retirement home. These are quite old people. Well, can I say that? 83.4 average age, range from 60 to 100. Okay, so quite rare sample for me. So therefore, we had to make a very short survey and paper pencil. So happiness, just one item they had used before that worked. So very simple. How happy are you with your life? And meaning in life, 7 items. I find my life to be meaningful, my life to be worthwhile. And the richness, I have a lot of interesting stories to tell. The deathbed, I would say I've seen and learned a lot. Okay, and the key here was that we wanted to measure childhood difficulties or challenge. So we included these items, whether they did not have enough food, didn't feel safe, illness, wasn't stable home, didn't have a support. Okay. So most people had it, but these are the 5 items to capture. So again, these are average 83 years old. So we're talking about sort of 70 years later. These experiences actually correlate with the current level of happiness, meaning, and psychological richness. So here are the basic descriptive zero-order correlation. So as you can see, meaning, happiness correlation 0.46, richness 0.32, richness and meaning 0.38. So positively correlated, but fairly distinct. But interestingly, the negative childhood experiences negatively correlated with happiness. So the more, financial difficulties and so forth, less happy they say now. And this is a very fancy retirement home. You have to be very rich to be there. So they are essentially sort of fairly, successful people. But even within this limited range of people, the childhood thing still had it's a correlation, but it's kind of interesting. In terms of meaning, though, negative but small correlation. But interestingly, richness was positive, although it's not significant. But because of this positive correlations, and of course these 3 are capturing the shared variance of positivity toward the life, we wanted to run regression to partial out the unique variance. So essentially regression, each of the main well-being dependent variable predicted from the negative childhood experience plus 2 other well-beings and age, gender, and whether they have a partner or not. These things are correlated with the current level of happiness. So why do you want to control? It's really from this paper, famously self-esteem and narcissism, similar concept but distinct, right? Both, if you just look at the zero-order correlation, it's positively correlated with antisocial behavior. But this is partially because there is a covariance. So once you predict antisocial behavior from both simultaneously self-esteem and narcissism, then now the sign change. So we wanted to make sure it's not due to this covariance. Okay, so result very quickly. Happiness, the result doesn't change whether you control or not. More negative childhood experience, lower level of happiness. Meaning, absolutely no difference. And now richness is significantly positively correlated. More negative childhood experiences, the higher level of richness. So it's kind of interesting, the opposite. Okay, but this is a very weird sample that I happen to get. So I wanted to replicate in the different culture, different context. And my former PhD student, Min-Kyung Koo, said, oh, she's collecting some data in Korea and there's some space. Do you want to collect some data? So yes. So I just dumped her my same, essentially, the scale. So 900 Korean adults recruited from online platform. They are very good. Most of them passed the attention check. And we use the full well-being scale, the satisfaction with life scale, the Stegger's meaning in life questionnaires, and our psychological richness questionnaire. And instead of 5 items, we ask standard sort of 12 negative life events. Did financial problem, discrimination, parental divorce, or their own divorce, etc., etc. Okay, yes, no, and attention check. So here is the replication. So negative events, again, happiness minus 0.19 correlation, so very similar. 0.06 positive correlation, it was 0.07 in previous sample, so almost like perfect replication. You do exactly same regression and essentially same pattern. More negative childhood experience, less happiness, but more richness. Okay, so this is good. So we wanted to extend this and also look at the potential mediators. So we recruited 435 US adults, and we had satisfaction with life scale, meaning in life questionnaire, psychologically rich life questionnaire. And then we thought these two potential mediators, that perhaps these negative events and childhood difficulty make people more resilient. Perhaps that gives them greater perspective changes. So, so that's what we did. So what did we find? Essentially, here is the basic replication, minus 0.22 correlation with the happiness, and already significant positive correlation with richness. Regression results essentially just consistent. And finally, we did the mediation analysis. And indeed, the more negative and challenging experiences they have, they report greater resilience and greater perspective change, and essentially greater resilience and perspective change, the greater psychological richness they have. Interestingly, if you replace this to happiness, the greater perspective change they experienced, less happiness they report. So if you want to be happy, right, really stay within your comfort zone. Don't experience something like perspective changing experiences. It's kind of interesting. All right. So the final study, because these are all one-shot correlational study, we wanted to do experiments. It's kind of difficult to induce childhood, negative events and so forth. So we had to rely on mild sort of the memory task. Essentially, we randomly assign participants to challenging versus fond childhood memory versus typical childhood day memory condition. So essentially, we instructed that no matter how lucky we are growing up, we all experience some kinds of obstacles and challenges. We're interested in hearing what kinds of challenge, obstacles you faced in your childhood. And based on the memory recall, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so essentially we said, just think about what kind of challenge and obstacle you had during the childhood in the challenge condition. And the fond memory condition, no matter how unlucky we are growing up, we all have some fond memories from childhood. Okay? And the typical day condition, just no matter what kind of childhood we had, we all have memories of ordinary typical days in addition to these. So 3 minutes writing exercise. And essentially, they write and they answer 3 aspects of life, and then resilience and perspective change. All right, so does challenge reduce happiness? Okay, answer is already here. Okay, here. So 1 to 7, 4.5, 5.06, 4.96. So these are significant difference. So those randomly assigned to challenging childhood condition essentially say that, oh yeah, now I'm not that happy. I mean, the difference is fairly small, but. And meaning, similarly, reduced meaning. But in terms of richness, essentially, there was no difference. Okay. So I thought this will increase, but it didn't. So that was a little bit disappointing, I must say. What about resilience? Actually, resilience, it didn't change, although this will change once you control for other things. In terms of perspective change, this was the biggest thing. Huge. So those who thought about obstacle and challenge, they say really their perspective in life changed over time. Whereas those people who just thought about fond memory or typical day, they say, I feel like I haven't changed much. Okay. So most importantly, just regression and mediation analysis. And so this direct path wasn't there, main effect, but once you added the perspective change, and then this mediation always control for two other well-being. So essentially, perfectly replicated the study 3 findings. Namely, the challenging childhood, when you think about that, you feel like you're a more resilient person, and you have changed, your perspective have changed, and more resilience, and the perspective change you have, the more psychological richness you report. Okay, so conclusion, what doesn't kill him makes him psychologically richer, although less happy. All right. Thank you so much, and you didn't interrupt me at all. But all right, I spent too much time, perhaps 4:23. So okay, welcome questions.
Questions?
I'm just going to put it in the chat that it's open for questions.
Yeah, let's
When
go.
we're talking about well-being, and especially
Hold on. Can we use the microphone?
Oh.
Of course.
when we're talking about well-being and what makes a good life, how we phrase this question, it was sort of alluded to by that one paper, but with meaning, and how do we relate that with morality of doing good in your life, and how do we sort of offshoot that with doing bad and perspectives of that?
So I think that virtuous life, those people who think they're leading the virtuous life tend to say that their life is meaningful because they feel like they're being morally good, right? But the flip side of it is that a little bit of moral convictions, that oftentimes you see that a little bit of self-righteousness, that I am doing like right thing and other people are not doing the right thing. So I didn't talk about these findings, but for instance, those people who are high in meaning in life also score high on right-wing authoritarianism. So those are the findings that gave me a pause and then decided, I think we want to study something else as well, not just meaning. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think to myself about the measurements that you're making about the characterization of individuals as rich and black and so on. And I keep coming back to Carol Dweck's notion of mindset that people have and how that might bifurcate psychological richness, so that people who report psychological richness could be of two types. If they're entity theorizing or incremental theorizing, you could well imagine that challenges for the entity theorist who think this is just a characterization of who I am, they might not have perspective change, they might not develop resilience, whereas incremental theorizing folks might do that. I'm just wondering if you've looked at those kind of theorized process orientations,
Yeah.
engaging the material in different ways.
Yeah, so we measure some of the growth mindset, and I thought it would be surely correlated with the psychological richness, but the zero-order correlation was not there, which is surprising. But on the other hand, when we measure, say, attributional complexity, the tendency to find the multiple reasons for somebody's one action, right? As opposed to essentialism, sort of one person's action, oh, this person is inherently this way. So that shows the consistent pattern. So psychologically rich people are way more attributionally complex and less essentialist and more holistic in thinking. But interestingly, the growth mindset, maybe that's particular scale, but we didn't find it. So. But conceptually, it has to be related to the growth mindset. Yeah.
We do have one question from the online audience. A comment, overall fascinating talk, thank you. When you ask individuals about happiness, meaningful lives, etc., do you let them define the concept themselves? And if so, how does one compare across individuals?
Yeah, so psychological richness is a new concept, so we usually give our definition of what we mean by psychological richness. Happiness and meaning, we don't really give them specific the definitions, but at the same time, there are studies where we ask, what is your ideal life? And just describe freely. And we did this in 9 countries, and then we do find quite a bit of variations. And in Angola, African country, a lot of ideal life was centered around the sort of the meeting the basic needs. Whereas Norway was very much the self-actualization kind of things. American students often say, oh, early retirement, I'm spending all time in the beach, don't worry about anything. Japanese person would say, it doesn't have to be luxurious, something ordinary, small. Family would be nice, and things like that. So you do find a lot of cultural variations, and of course, individual differences too. A lot of people say personal success or victory is the happiness, but for others, it's just not having stress and so forth. So definitely the concept of happiness or meaning and richness itself have some systematic variations as well. Yeah. I have one paper in 2013 that tracked the historical change in the United States, how it used to be good luck and fortune, and that definition dropped out and became satisfaction with one's desires and goals. 30 countries, we study a dictionary definition of happiness, and 24 out of 30 countries, it's still good luck and fortune. So when you have this good luck and fortune concept of happiness, then you're not as devastated as when you don't, when you are not succeeding. So rumination, for instance, is much higher when you have this pressure to feel happy and conceive happiness as a personal success.
Yeah, so I was wondering a little bit about your measures, because I'm wondering how perspective change, it seems like perspective change must be a subset in some way of psychological richness, that those two things seem like they ought to be related. So I'm wondering how you measured them.
Right.
Resilience seems different. Resilience actually seems to suggest I maybe stayed this. I overcame something and stayed the same. There was a thread of perseverance or something, and so I'm wondering conceptually how those relate.
Right, resilience items have a lot of I overcame, and I'm sort of efficacy type. Like I can deal with the difficulty type of items, whereas perspective changes the way I view about the world change, the way I view about myself change. And the psychological richness, although in the definition I said the perspective change, we never ask explicitly anything about the perspective change itself. That I have a lot of interesting stories to tell. I had a lot of intense moments in my life, that type of things. So,
We have one question from one of our affiliates, Kosti, who's at both at the University of Chicago and the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. And then I think one for Shannon, and someone in the room was texting me about a question too. So I think after those 3 questions we'll be done. So Kosti asks, first he says, thank you, Professor Oishi, for a wonderful lecture. How do you see the connection that other synonyms of happiness and life share, such as thriving and flourishing? Are these different or related?
I think that thriving and flourishing are really umbrella term. So for some, happiness might be the thriving. For some, the meaning in life might be thriving. For some, psychological richness might be thriving. And flourishing, at least the way it's measured, is a aggregation of happiness, meaning, social relationship, health, and so forth. So it seems to me that flourishing and the thriving is sort of more of the overall functionings or subjective feeling that I think it's a trying to capture the good life. Yeah.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Perhaps because it's desirable to want to live a psychologically rich life, one might be left thinking about how to manufacture challenges in their life. And that made me think that childhood challenges, you typically are not in control. You typically are in someone else's care,
Right.
And maybe even experience lack of control yet, because there isn't that careful hand guiding you. And that seems very different than me manufacturing challenges,
Sure.
where I might have more of a, let's say, the locus of control is within me.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about, as we sort of learn from your work, what does it mean to be challenge-seeking in this sort of sense, and what is the locus of control here? Is it doing some work or not?
Yeah.
In your mind?
Yeah. So we have data about college students, what kind of courses they take, and those who take challenging courses report that their life is psychologically richer. And if you care about the happiness, trying to maximize happiness, the best way to do it is just take psych courses and get all A's, right? So outcome focus. So I think the different approach tend to give rise to the different sort of psychological state, but also, it's the other way. I mean, the direction is hard to tell, but definitely, I think there is a mindset of, what do I want to maximize? I want to just really challenge myself. I just want to really get the positive reinforcement and positive outcome. And I think that makes huge difference in the long run. And the openness experiences, of course. Open people tend to go study abroad, tend to take challenging courses, and then those experiences make them a little bit more open as well. So there are some evidence for that as well. Yeah.
Go ahead,
So I have a question about this first study that you brought up regarding the questionnaire. Correct me if I'm wrong, sorry, but the question, there was only one question regarding happiness, right? It was just how happy, and then the other ones had a kind of subset questions. I guess I was curious because we've been having this conversation about the subjectiveness of what it means to be happy, on why that one was just a one question of how happy do you consider your life to be, or, but the other ones had some sort of subsets of different questions kind of defining what it means to be meaningful or rich, but happy was happy.
Yeah, so in this retirement home, they already had many sort of same survey sent out, and then they just traditionally always use the one item scale. But one item happiness scale has been used a lot in the huge nationally representative data, and that's probably the most well established or justifiable. The meaning and richness are little measurement, it's not as precise. So I think that was the decisions. But the rest of the study, we always use the multiple items, and the result did not change. So so it's always good to have multiple items for sure. But it's good to see the consistency in the result as well.
Thank you so much for joining
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
And last question, is that you on that kayak?
No. I wish it was PowerPoint, the freely available picture that looked most like a good